When I reflect on our 100-year history, there's so much to celebrate. Every day, we're leading medicine by providing the latest innovations and treatments.
This was true in 1951 when we opened the main building in the Texas Medical Center, and it's true today in our newest facility, Walter Tower.
We've become a leading independent academic medical center.
We're home to a world-renowned research institute.
This will leave a legacy for millions of patients for generations to come.
And just think, it all started in a 30-bed hospital on the corner of San Jacinto and Rosalie.
At the end of World War I, Houston was a city on the move. Jobs were plentiful in the new oil fields. Rice University had just graduated its first class. And the small town had seen its population triple over the past 2 decades. But the fortunes of the city were about to be severely tested. The Spanish influenza had arrived. Patients began arriving at hospital doors complaining of chills, fever, and fatigue. And while doctors and nurses toiled around the clock, the Houston Post described hundreds of individuals left without attention as the doors of the overcrowded hospitals were closed against them.
Every physician in the city was fighting a battle that they didn't know how to win. Physicians in charge of health in the city were dying, patients were dying.
But on the corner of Rosalie and San Jacinto, a small hospital established by Oscar Norsworthy in 1909 was trying to do its best.
Dr. Norsworthy was a very good physician, well respected.
He basically built a wing onto his house to take care of his patients.
With 33 patient beds, the original Norsworthy Hospital was so small, it didn't even have a public restroom. Early ads touted electric fans, reasonable rates, and a fresh supply of vegetables and eggs from their own gardens.
But in 1919, when people were dying of the Spanish flu, Oscar Norsworthy realized he needed to be able to do a better job in terms of patient care.
He needed better facilities. It needed to be enlarged. It needed to be patient-focused. And he said, well, maybe I'll just sell the hospital. He wasn't going to sell to just anybody. He said, who do I trust?
And so he went to visit the Methodist church. And he said, has the church ever thought about owning a hospital? Well, first of all, First Methodist Church, Houston, in 1919, was the largest Methodist church in America with 3,000 members.
And Methodists take very seriously what John Wesley had to tell us. You're not a Christian unless you're showing it by your service.
And they decided this might be a good opportunity for the church to purchase this small clinic.
Dr. Norsworthy said, I'll sell it to you, but on one condition, you're going to build a new modern hospital.
And so for a full year, churches from Galveston, Bryan College Station, Texarkana, all started raising money.
And in 1924, they opened a new hospital.
Five stories high, it employed 30 individuals, and it had 72 patient rooms, each with a private bath. A school of nursing was opened with 24 students. On the 4th floor were 4 new operating rooms equipped with no-shadow lights, making night operation a possibility. Everything looked so comfortable and cozy, the Houston Post said, that one was tempted to believe it would be a pleasure to be sick here.
Dr. James Greenwood was the chief of neurosurgery here for a long, long time. He told me there was no air conditioning in those days, and so in the operating room, they would open the window, and the local kids would climb up in the pecan tree outside the hospital, and he would be operating on somebody's head, and the kids would sit in the pecan tree watching him operate.
Dr. Martha Wood, a pathologist, made her own rabies vaccine. Dr. Charles Green performed some of Houston's first blood transfusions. And there was Dr. James Greenwood.
Dr. Greenwood did the first brain tumor operation in Texas.
In the middle 30s, he started fiddling around with cautery. Modern surgery is totally dependent on the capacity to stop blood instantaneously with electrical impulses.
But when the current devices proved too imprecise for brain surgery, Dr. Greenwood went to work in his garage, creating an alternative.
And he invented what we still call the greenies, the bipolar forceps. You would grasp a tiny blood vessel it's like a pair of tweezers, but they're electrically connected, and he could stop bleeding extremely accurately in the central nervous system. And the bipolar transformed modern microsurgery. He started taking out intramedullary spinal cord tumors. And before he started doing this, maybe one or two had been done in the whole world literature. He made a film to show you how successful he was. He showed people who could hardly walk before surgery, and then he had a group of them, and he photographed them with a 8mm camera dancing.
That focus on the patient at the center of everything we do has always been part and parcel of Methodists.
By the early 30s, the devastation of the Great Depression had spread to Houston. Houston Methodist was hit particularly hard as they continued to offer services to those who couldn't pay, and their debts soon totaled over $100,000. In a letter to the board of directors, Superintendent D.H. Hotchkiss asked for a loan of $10,000, with which to lift the load of floating indebtedness on the institution.
The board in the 30s had some serious discussions of why are we even trying to do this? Maybe we should close it down entirely.
We didn't have enough money to buy a chair. We didn't have enough money to buy a box of stove.
Unable to cope with the demands, D.H. Hotchkiss resigned from his presidency. And with no apparent successor, the task of saving the hospital from closure fell to his secretary, Josie Roberts.
The hospital was in debt, deeply in debt. As the old saying is, I took the bull by the horn.
Josie Roberts was a mover and a shaker. She had a vision.
No job was ever too small for her, and no task was ever too large.
A widow with a 6-year-old daughter, she had no formal training and only a high school degree.
And she goes and applies what I would consider pretty modern sort of management science and says, we can do this. And she manages cash flow and manages vendors and keeps the place afloat and sets out a vision.
We had to do a lot of things to cut corners.
You'd see one person one day would be running the switchboard, the same person the next day would be admitting somebody, and that same person the next day might be waiting behind the counter on the cafeteria.
She refinanced the mortgage and slashed salaries, but made up for it by allowing the employees to eat for free in the cafeteria. Luckily, Josie Roberts had an ally who was just as determined as she was to keep the doors of the Methodist Hospital open. Ella Florence Fondren grew up dirt poor in Corsicana, Texas. She helped run the family boarding house, which is where she met and fell in love with a roughneck named Walter Fondren, who would go on to be one of the founders of Exxon. After his untimely death, Ella would take his seat on the Methodist Hospital board and hold it for the next 43 years.
Mrs. Fondren was a force to be reckoned with.
She just felt very strongly that there ought to be very good health care for people in the city of Houston.
As the Depression lingered, Ella Fondren and board members such as Jesse Jones, Jim West, E.L. Crane, and B.F. Bonner wrote personal checks to cover the hospital's operating expenses.
Mrs. Roberts would tell her where we were financially. This is what we need going forward. And boom, within a short period of time, that money would show up.
This isn't our money, she would say. We're just being stewards of it.
But you know, thinking about philanthropy through the days of the Depression, I think it's worth also thinking about people in the churches in Houston and all up through East Texas, all the way to Texarkana, which is a part of the Texas Annual Conference. And they would have spaghetti suppers, they'd have bake sales, all sorts of things to help the hospital survive. For example, the Bluebirds, they were an organization of volunteers from the churches. At Easter time, they would dye Easter eggs in the basement down there at First Methodist Church and sell them to raise money.
But that was really special about the city and about Methodist. I think Methodist in many ways parallels the generosity of the city, people giving back.
That was true in the 30s, and it's been a constant throughout our history. All you have to do is look at the names across our campus. Fondren, Brown, Alkeck, Bush, Dunn, Scurlock, Smith, all the way up to Walter.
From a philanthropy point of view, that's one of the most impressive gifts that I'll see in my life.
These people that came and made their fortunes felt like this is a city that's special and I want to give back.
And perhaps no vision was bigger and bolder than the Texas Medical Center.
If you see the early pictures of the Texas Medical Center, this was marshland. Deer were roaming around out here.
In the early 1940s, the future home of the Texas Medical Center was an empty park with Herman Hospital tucked away in the corner. But in those empty fields, the trustees of the M.D. Anderson Foundation saw a bright future.
Bill Bertner and others who said, wouldn't it be great if we could be able to put a series of hospitals all in the same area of town so that when people came, they could be able to, have everything in one place.
Eventually, the Texas Medical Center will attract people not only from all sections of our own country, but from the entire Western Hemisphere, said trustee Jesse Jones.
It was a very Houston vision. We're going to invest and we won't fail, we will succeed. It's a space program vision, it's a Port of Houston vision, it's, oil and gas, wildcatting kind of vision.
They had enough to go to the citizens in 1943 as a full-page Houston Post ad to vote for the Texas Medical Center.
And so the vote came in and it was almost unanimous.
Another leading citizen, oilman Hugh Roy Cullen, reached into his own pocket to make that vision a reality.
He had given $1 million to Baptist Memorial Hospital and $1 million to Herman Hospital. Well, Mr. William N. Blanton, Elizabeth Waring's grandfather, found out.
So my grandfather and another trustee, Claude Hamill, went to him and asked him if he would donate $1 million to the Methodist Hospital.
There were a couple of things he liked about what the Methodists were doing. They had a children's clinic. He liked the fact that the Methodist Hospital was not just Methodist. There were other denominations. So he said right then and there, I want to write a check for $1 million for Methodist Hospital as well.
If that hadn't happened, nothing else would have happened.
I firmly believe we couldn't have been where we are today without being part of this TMC.
The gift will make real a dream of many years, said Bishop A. Frank Smith, to erect a new hospital. On May 31st, 1950, the cornerstone for the new hospital was laid. Our fondest hope for the Methodist Hospital, Josie Roberts said, is that it rank in scientific standards, furnishings, and equipment with the best hospitals in the world.
Bill Fondren had a vision of a 300-bed hospital.
And he felt that was too big.
If you overbill, and you don't get any revenue, and what have you accomplished?
They're pushing back, saying, maybe 220, 230, 220, 230.
And they wrangled and wrangled over that. We'd never get that many people in here.
Right.
And I said, well, if we don't have any better outlook on Houston than that, why, you just count me out.
She was beginning to grow aggravated and quite frustrated where the conversation was going. And so she decided to just pick up her purse and start walking toward the door. They said, Miss Fondren, where are you going?
I told them, I said, no, 200 beds, what do you have now? But I said, if you don't make it larger than that, 300 beds, I'm not interested at all.
So, oh, Miss Fondren, don't leave, don't leave. And so what happened was she did not leave.
So they decided then they'd put that on there, but they made me pay a lot of it.
Josie Roberts was also concerned about the size and placement of the land they had received within the medical center.
Josie Roberts also recognized to get 7.5 acres. It wasn't enough land, and one of the board members said, you know, little lady, you don't understand how much 7 acres is.
This man was a very high businessman. He looked me in the eyes and he said, Miss Roberts, I don't believe you know how much 7 acres is. I said, Mr. So-and-so, I'm afraid I do, and that's the reason I know that 7 acres isn't going to be enough for that Methodist hospital.
That was not what women were expected to be or do.
I think that's what makes Methodist so special, is that you had these strong women who would stand up to the board.
You see, I'm one of these that I talk back to them. I'm going to tell you the way I feel about things. I don't come in hard.
And the irony is, as we look in the future decades to come, they're always buying more land. I always think Josie Roberts probably smiling somewhere at the idea that she was right all along. When Methodist opened its doors, the whole city came out. It was one of the best designed hospitals for its day. There was all kinds of telecommunications. The early days of film was thought about. Walking into the hospital, there were beauty salons or administrative offices. More operating rooms than I think anyone at Methodist had ever imagined.
From the main lobby to the patient's room, the new Methodist hospital seems less like a hospital and more like a luxurious hotel, the Houston Chronicle. Peering out our door into the marbled halls, the thought occurred to us that we were in heaven, the Houston Post.
When they opened that new hospital, the Methodists were all so proud of it. My father and mother would bring us as kids after church on Sunday out here, and we would eat Sunday dinner in the cafeteria. And we weren't the only ones. There were a lot of church people that came out on Sundays after church to have lunch in the cafeteria. They were all so proud of the new hospital.
I used to come out on Sundays with my parents. They had these big leather sofas I'll never forget. My brothers and I would just climb all over the furniture.
Josie Roberts waited to retire until the building got open, formally opened, and then she announced that she was retiring.
She said, I had 2 main goals in life. One was to raise a good Christian daughter.
The other was to build a new hospital. I accomplished those things.
As I reflect on the past 100 years, buildings have changed, technology has changed, the city has changed, but the one constant has been the people.
It's people. It's people. And the culture that is built here.
The culture is what makes this institution so good, so great.
So in 1951, when we've moved into this brand new Texas Medical Center, this was a very pivotal point.
We had a state-of-the-art building. We had state-of-the-art technology now, but you had to get state-of-the-art doctors in. You had to get state-of-the-art nurses in. We were basically a startup again.
And so we needed that hunger for new knowledge, that hunger for doing things better, that hunger for innovation. We needed a person who believed there was a better way to care for patients.
Dr. Michael DeBakey came to Houston in 1948 with his reputation well established. As a surgeon in World War II, he had helped come up with the concept of the MASH unit. And now, as the chair of surgery at the newly established Baylor College of Medicine, he was looking to partner with a hospital where he could treat patients. He approached Houston Methodist and quickly struck up a good working relationship with Josie Roberts' hand-picked successor, Ted Bowen.
Mr. Bowen realized what an incredible man Dr. DeBakey was. And he recognized that supporting him was very important.
The collaboration between the two institutions proved a good fit.
Baylor provided the science, Methodist provided the place for Dr. DeBakey and all his colleagues to work.
Dr. DeBakey set the expectation for what a leading academic medical center should be. It's a place that constantly pushes the envelope relative to discovery and applied discovery and innovation.
What drives me, DeBakey said? Well, I know that one day heart disease will be a matter of history. We are on the verge of so many miracles.
In the 1950s, Dr. DeBakey started doing blood vessel surgery at a time when no one in the whole world did it.
So this led to a very rapid interest in fixing big aneurysms ballooning out to the main arteries.
An aneurysm was a disintegration and ballooning of the aortic wall, and Dr. DeBakey invented the technique that made it go from a totally lethal disease to a totally curable disease.
And in the early 50s, there was an explosion of firsts.
He did the first carotid endarterectomy to open a blockage in the carotid artery, which goes up each side of the neck. He developed a homograft, which is a graft removed from a cadaver to repair aneurysms of the aorta.
He and his team were also the first to do coronary bypass grafting.
So that was done by Dr. Jimmy Howell and a man by the name of Dr. Ed Garrett.
Dad was called the Texas Tornado. It was charge ahead.
My dad did everything in high gear.
And if you didn't charge ahead with him, you better get out of the way.
Let me have it. You're too slow. You know, I can't stand that. You're too slow.
Dr. DeBakey would work 20 hours a day, go home, sleep for 4, and be back at 4 or 5 in the morning.
Most people were in awe of the kind of procedures that were being done and in fear of the environment.
I didn't think I was going to make it. We'd get in here around 6:30 in the morning, and we'd up and keep operating till 1 or 2 in the morning. So now that we stop at 11 or 12 o'clock at night, we feel like we're slacking. I'm sorry, but he's up there watching me. Dr. Baker always worked at a very high speed. He ran up the stairs, ran down the stairs.
And he always had a group of residents and fellows with him.
And one day, one resident opened the door to a broom closet, and everyone was moving at such a high speed, half the group ended up in the broom closet.
We can't stand by and wait for final answers, DeBakey said. There are lives to be saved today.
This is Walter Cronkite reporting from the observation dome of an operating room in the Methodist Hospital, Houston, Texas. Below me, a delicate operation is taking place, an operation on the human heart. The surgeon is Dr. Michael Ellis DeBakey.
Dr. DeBakey was entrepreneurial. He was willing to take chances.
This morning, Dr. DeBakey will remove the whole artery and replace it with this. It is a tube of knitted plastic called Dacron, and no one has attempted such a major replacement before.
He wasn't able to get enough homografts, so he was looking for something else to replace human veins.
He went downtown to get some nylon cloth.
The store dress clerk said, "Sorry, Dr. DeBakey, but we're out of that, but we got this new stuff called Dacron."
And I would actually cut these in 2 sheets, the sizes I wanted to use. And on my wife's sewing machine, I'd sew the edges, make a tube, you see.
And he cleverly decided blood under pressure would go in there and sort of blow him up like a balloon.
And sterilized that and used that to repair the first aortic aneurysm.
This is one of our own design, and this is what we use routinely now. This really becomes a very good substitute for the artery.
Dr. DeBakey, how did you get approval from the Human Investigations Committee, the IRB? And, his answer at that time was, well, yes, we had to get approval. I applied to the IRB. That was me, and I approved it, and we did it.
Dad was kind of a tinkerer with everything. He really enjoyed learning how something worked.
Dr. DeBakey, with all the fantastic things that you can do today, what is it you would like to do?
So far as we know, the heart is a pump, and we should be able to develop a pump, mechanical pump, that will substitute for the heart. And I'm convinced this can be done.
And the first version, of course, was the left ventricular assist.
In an operation lasting 6 hours in this amphitheater, surgeon Michael DeBakey and his team today made medical history, transplanting an artificial heart pump into a critically ill 65-year-old man, Marcel de Rudda.
It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you Dr. Michael E. DeBakey.
Suddenly we're on the world map. It's a place to go. It's a place that was on the forefront. And even more so when the Duke of Windsor came in 1964.
The Duke of Windsor is here for surgery to remove an abdominal aneurysm.
He was asked by a reporter, why did he come here? And he said he came to see the maestro.
The maestro?
Methodist and Dr. DeBakey then became world famous.
15 years after leaving the corner of Rosalie and San Jacinto, Houston Methodist surgeons were making headlines all over the world. Dr. Paul Harrington came up with a way to fix scoliosis.
A Harrington rod was one of the great advances in modern orthopedics. Steel rods, literally, looked like rebars.
You have a patient with a curvature of their spine, and you would place the rod in there along with devices that hook it to the vertebrae, and it would hold the spine straight.
Dr. Joe King and Dr. Hugh Tullos worked with the Houston Astros and wrote seminal papers about the mechanics of the pitcher's elbow, which laid the groundwork for the hospital's future involvement with pro sports teams.
We would have surgeons from around the country and around the world that would come to watch.
Expansion was on the horizon, and its impetus came from a familiar source. Ella Fondren had been living on the 8th floor of the hospital as she recovered from hip surgery.
Dr. King and Dr. DeBakey and Ms. Fondren would look out the window up there in 807, and they could visualize a building over there, and Dr. DeBakey could visualize the heart cardiovascular part of it. Dr. King could visualize the orthopedic part of it.
The Fondren Brown Building was dedicated on December 4th, 1968, providing new operating and recovery rooms. Over the next decade, there would be so many ribbon-cutting ceremonies that Ella Fondren bought a pair of sterling silver scissors, which are used to this day for just such occasions.
Houston, Texas claims to be the fastest growing city in the United States.
The growth of Houston also contributed to the growth of the hospital. 20 years after its opening, the hunting grounds around the medical center had transformed into a sprawling, growing metropolis.
I emphasize that as an institution, we have an obligation to the city of Houston, and that it's important that we continue to evolve along with the city.
In the 1970s, that meant expansion in the Texas Medical Center. But as the city grew and exploded out in the suburbs, Methodist followed.
During my tenure, we acquired the San Jacinto Methodist Hospital in Baytown, and we developed the strategy of the outlying hospitals.
I still remember as March of 1998, we opened up Sugar Land. 2001, we opened up Willowbrook Hospital. In 2010, we opened up West. Of course, we opened up the Woodlands in 2017.
From the original entrance on Bertner Avenue, Houston Methodist has now grown to nearly 200 front doors, welcoming patients throughout the metropolitan area. Over the past 20 years, the hospital has also worked to establish new service lines and build new centers of excellence, such as the Underwood Center for Digestive Disorders.
The goal of the center is first and foremost to provide the highest quality integrated care to patients with digestive disorders. These disorders need to be recognized, they need to be supported, and by providing concentrated support, that you can actually make a difference.
We also have cancer centers throughout the whole of Houston so that we can give care throughout all of our hospitals. The cancer center is unique because it's a matrix system that crosses different departments with the sole goal of not only early detection and prevention, but also cure.
The Transplant Center continues to build on the groundbreaking work done by Dr. DeBakey.
We've done a lot of firsts, like the combined kidney pancreas skull scalp transplant, the first O2 islet transplant. Today, we are doing almost 550 transplants a year.
And that's what's so inspiring. We're constantly growing and evolving.
Imagine a city. Imagine a city within that city, dedicated to the goals of rendering the finest of care to the sick and disabled. The city is Houston. The city within that city is the Texas Medical Center.
In the 70s, Houston was the center of heart surgery in the world.
We'd be doing 4 and 5 open hearts a week in our unit in Sydney, and here we'd be doing 4 and 5 a day per surgeon.
At one point, Methodist had more CAT scanners than Canada did.
And there were truly, truly great surgeons here.
At that time, Dr. Stanley Crawford was doing 2/3 of the thoracoabdominal rooms on the planet Earth. 2/3 on the planet Earth, one man.
Dr. Jimmy Howell did a prodigious amount of cardiac surgery.
John Overstreet was the chief of surgery.
You know, when I was in medical school, we all learned off of something called Noon's Notes, and they were handwritten, Xeroxed, basically pamphlet of Dr. Noon's kind of keynotes.
But the whole key to, I think, being a good administrator is to kind of see the landscape and project where it's going. And I think back in the 70s, Ted Boehm was very good at doing that.
We have a very sizable stake in the future developments of healthcare, he said, in new forms of its delivery, in new techniques, and in new technologies.
Okay, doctor, this is what I have for breakfast. What's wrong with that?
There's too much saturated fat and cholesterol. You can have cereal with skim milk on it. We replace the cream in your coffee.
And I suppose the butter comes out in the margarine.
The butter comes out, exactly.
If I sort of fast forever, I'm going to make it, right?
Not quite.
Preventative medicine was a relatively new field when Dr. Antonio Gatto attempted to understand the connection between lipids, cholesterol, and heart disease.
When I first met Dr. DeBakey, the cardiology community was very skeptical about lipids. And he said, well, only a handful of my patients have an elevated cholesterol. So I said, well, what do you consider an elevated cholesterol? And he said, well, anything over 300 we consider to be high. And he said, well, why don't you just measure it in all my patients?
We are carrying out studies to find out how the fat is carried in the blood, what the nature is of the substances that sticks them together, and finally how they get into the blood vessel, the coronary artery, to cause a heart attack.
In 1985, the study was finished, and there was evidence for the first time that with the drug, you could lower cholesterol and lower the risk of heart attacks and strokes.
Houston Methodist had come full circle, Ted Bowen said. We're now working to prevent disease, as well as cure the sick and injured.
The board and administration were proactive. They understood in the 70s the groundwork of healthcare in this country was changing.
They realized that there were a lot of diseases like Alzheimer's, like Parkinson's, like ALS, that did not have a surgical approach that was meaningful. And so we set up the Neurosensory Center. We started programs in myotonic muscular dystrophy, Duchenne, in Parkinson's disease and in Alzheimer's disease.
We were among the first centers in the world to do pallidotomies.
And we were the first to establish a multidisciplinary clinic for ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease.
But perhaps the greatest trend of the 70s was the growth of outpatient services. To meet this demand, the hospital looked to build 2 tall towers called the Total Healthcare Center.
And the concept of the Total Healthcare Center is to have the physicians' offices throughout the building, certain outpatient testing that could be done to the patient. And so in a day, the doctor can see his outpatients and then go make his rounds, and all he had to do is walk across the walkway.
The plan, however, faced a major obstacle. As Josie Roberts had predicted, land in the medical center had become scarce. But board member Eddie Skurlock encouraged the hospital to look across Fannin Street at a parcel of land on which sat a restaurant called Bill Williams' Chicken House.
Bill Williams, he asked for a lot more money than they thought was reasonable, so they kind of let that go. And Eddie Skurlock, he had heard that there were other people making offers to Bill Williams.
Unbeknownst to the hospital, Mr. Skurlock purchased the land himself.
He just couldn't tolerate indecision.
And one day they were having a long-range planning committee meeting, and he came in about 30 minutes late, threw his hat on the table, he always wore a hat, and said, "Gentlemen, I have just bought the Bill Williams Chicken House in case the hospital ever needs that land." One of the members said, "Well, I don't think we need to have our long-range planning committee meeting. We've just answered our question of needing more space."
The building that bore Eddie Skurlock's name opened in 1979.
And then as managed care and other things come in, it's no longer the how many beds you have as a hospital, it's what kind of services you have.
Larry Mathis, who was the CEO at the time, had a vision that hospitals could really be leading in a customer service industry.
Welcome to this ribbon cutting of the Dunn Tower. When we cut the ribbon, we become today the largest private hospital in the United States, therefore the world. We didn't set out to become the biggest. We set out to become the best.
As the 80s drew to a close, the hospital's reach and influence continued to grow.
Live from Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, it's the 1985 Jerry Lewis Super Show to benefit the muscular...
We not only helped run the telethon in terms of the medical expertise,
And welcome to Telethon.
but we would all go down to Channel 2 on Labor Day
And I'd like to introduce now Dr. Stanley Appel.
and appear in the telethon.
Nobody does more than MDA for those with ALS.
In 1986, Dr. George Noon gave Houston Methodist another leading medicine moment when he performed the first heart-lung transplant. In the world of sports medicine, the hospital saw new relationships formed with the Oilers, the Texans, and a continuing collaboration with the Astros. And a new center was created to work with a different type of athlete.
When people are playing a violin, their heart rate may go up to 175 times a minute. It's like being on a treadmill. And that was where this whole idea about the Center for Performing Arts Medicine came from. Why don't we have doctors on the bench for the arts like we do for football and baseball?
And it blossomed into probably more than 60 physicians now, helping to take care of the different performing artists in the city.
Methodist is the official healthcare provider for the Houston Ballet, Houston Symphony, the Houston Grand Opera. It's amazing.
The hospital also reached milestones in other areas. Nurses were allowed to wear slacks for the first time in its history. In 1996, the first website went up. And for $3, one could use the newfangled contraption in the lobby to send a facsimile.
I've been around for almost 40 years in this medical center.
The field is changing all the time. Buildings are changing, newer faces, newer innovation. I love this because it's very vibrant.
It was raining, but nothing unusual, nothing terrible in the forecast. And sometime just after midnight, I get a phone call that said there's water in the building. I got in my car and got as far as 59 and 610. You couldn't go any further on 59 because it was just a lake.
We're having major flooding in the greater Houston area and some areas that haven't been.
I turned around and looked at the TV, and there were 18-wheelers floating down the Southwest Freeway.
And you can see the water is everywhere. This is
And I got into the hospital, and we opened the door down to the basement, and we could see water.
The basement had the emergency backup for the generators.
It was about 3 in the morning, and the Fondren Alcac building lost all power.
So I pick up the phone, called,
and she asked me how bad it was.
And Vicki started crying and said, "It's the worst thing I've ever seen."
My main concern was patient lives.
What I love about this institution is its resiliency. I mean, we've been knocked around, knocked down a few times. This is one of those times. And there wasn't a lot of time spent sort of in the rearview mirror. It was really about, okay, who are we? What are we going to do?
There were staff that as the power went down, just manually ventilated people's hearts for hours on end.
I remember the Rice football team showing up and said, "What can we do?" And I said, "You can start on the floors and start helping carry people down."
Several of the physicians went to some of the sporting goods stores and convinced them to open and sell them like porta potties, going and buying just tons of bottled water.
And we had to move patients over to the Scurlock and Smith Tower
because they had some outpatient operating rooms.
And they set up the Smith Tower as an ICU.
To me, the harder part was 6 or 8 weeks later, when you're still slugging it through, you still don't have any air conditioning, you're still trying to figure out how to replace all the equipment.
All of us came in for 7 a.m. meetings for the next 40 days straight. There was a coming together of the medical staff and the hospital administration in very valuable ways that made us stronger, made us closer.
People bonded together. I mean, it was an incredible bonding experience.
Allison caused us all to take a step back and take a breath. In the early 2000s were tough. And there were a lot of changes in management, changes in structure.
Everybody was kind of in their own venues and kind of isolated.
We had to have a shared goal.
And so Tom Doherty, who was the vice president of spiritual care at the time, began to revisit the issue of how we could be able to inspire our employees to know that they were a part of a larger whole. And so at the beginning of the century, we developed what we call the I-CARE values: integrity, compassion, accountability, respect, and excellence.
We had 160 sessions over 18 months where every employee was mandated to attend a 4-hour session to establish who we are and what's expected of you. It just clicked, and the whole organization on a dime turned.
I would have to say it's the soul of Methodist Hospital.
It's how we conduct ourselves every day.
I think Harvey, the last hurricane here in Houston, really bore out the eye care values. And Dr. Boom had talked to the board members and raised several $1 million for our employees. And then a number of employees donated into the fund.
These are just things that come from our employees' hearts. We had a patient, he and his wife were celebrating his anniversary while in the hospital, and the staff put together a romantic dinner. Those things happen, they happen every day.
In the late 90s, early 2000s, we put labels and words on the eye care values. But those values, that spirit has been here since day one of this hospital existing.
Grit. Grit. To me, that's what Methodist Hospital represents. It has grit. Having a passion in what you're doing, followed by a sense of purpose and a sense of hope.
From Ella Fondren, who stood up and said, we need a 300-bed hospital, to Josie Roberts guiding us through the Great Depression.
There's no shortage of individuals who said, we're not just gonna be good, we're not gonna fail, we're gonna be the best.
I think it was April 22nd. We woke up and the newspaper headline said that Baylor had formed a long-term affiliation with St. Luke's Episcopal Hospital.
I just couldn't believe it. I was stunned.
We had really strived to attain a new long-term academic medical affiliation.
See, a lot of people were wringing their hands. Baylor was gone. My goodness, they're finished. So I called a board meeting and said, we got a decision to make. If anybody wants to be an outstanding community hospital, we're that. But that has never really been quite good enough for Methodist. So the second one is, do we wish to undertake our risk and all to try to become an academic medical center?
And Mr. Bookout made one of those profound statements when he said, I'm not interested in what Methodist is going to be in 3 or 5 years. Tell me what it's going to be in 75 years.
First step, of course, became a matter of finding an academic partner.
We had a relationship with Dean Tony Gatto at Weill Cornell Medical College.
John Bookout came to New York and we had breakfast together.
I arrived and Tony was sitting in a hired car out in front on his telephone. It's about 10 minutes before Tony came in. And he said, why don't you affiliate with us? I said, are you serious? He said, I was on the telephone with my chairman and he's already said he'll support it. And we shook hands and that was the deal. We had to demonstrate that we were for real. So we presented to the board and got board approval to create a research institute and fund it with $100 million.
John Bookout asked me and Dr. Mike Lieberman to put together the backbone of what the Medical Research Institute was going to be.
They decided that we're only going to do research that is very close to being a product or a device. We call it translational research.
That is completely consistent with our DNA, completely consistent with Dr. Michael DeBakey, who was all about driving new innovations to the bedside. We have a wonderful affiliation with Texas A&M.
We put the College of Medicine with the College of Engineering and create an engineering medicine program dubbed InMed.
The training that one gets in engineering is the type of training that leads to solutions to problems that are practical, that work in the real world. So this truly is a place that's on the forefront.
The Walter Tower has operating rooms that are like none other in the world.
An example of that is our hybrid operating rooms.
Which are operating rooms with cath labs built into them. So we can do the biggest of open operations, or we can extend our reach using catheters and wires.
Another cutting-edge facility we're proud of is the Mighty Center. Barbara Bass had this amazing vision that we can rethink how people are trained. And we said we can use simulation technology. Eventually, we can use augmented reality and artificial reality.
That has always been our commitment, is to be on the leading edge of medicine.
As was the case so many times in our history, when we had a need, the Houston philanthropic community really got behind us.
Mr. Bookout gave one of the foundational chairs. Ernie Cockrell established the Ernie Cockrell Jr. Presidential Distinguished Endowed Chair. The Katz family gave a transformational gift to the Research Institute. The founder and family have carried on Ella and Walter's legacy with continuing support. The Walters, the Lukes, the Dunn family, the Blanton family, the Bush family, the Conovers, the Costas, and so many other families and foundations have ensured that Houston Methodist will continue to thrive.
They also provide counsel and guidance and root for us to be successful. And I can't overexpress how important that is to all of us.
In 2004, Houston Methodist had no training programs, no educational programs or fellowships. And now we have 43 programs with 313 residents and fellows.
And now we have about 100 doctors in the Department of Medicine. We're publishing in the top journals. So we've made the honor roll at U.S. News.
We now have over 2,000 employees. We now credential over 600 faculty. We have more than 1,000 clinical protocols.
The research is generating more than $50 million a year of external funding.
40 residency programs, 30-odd departments, hired 700 people, built 2 new hospitals, 2 giant new buildings. We can achieve in the next 10 years what we've achieved in the last 10 years. Yeah, there's nothing that can hold us back.
In 1960, they decided to expand the hospital, and they put up a mural. 96 feet long, 16 feet tall, with 1.5 million mosaic tiles. In the center of it, you have Christ with his arms extended. You see Hippocrates, Galen, Florence Nightingale.
It stated, you are coming into the loving arms of Christ, and we're going to treat you as he would have treated you.
That illness is not just in itself physical, but sometimes spiritual.
And to have healing, you've got to address the whole person. Human beings are more than just physical tissue. We are people with a spirit, and that spirit needs to be attended to.
What attracted me to Houston Methodist were the people and the values of the organization.
You push yourself and push yourself to be the best you can, not because of you, it's because you want to make a difference.
Dr. DeBakey said it's a hospital with a soul.
When you move a patient to the operating room not sure that they're gonna make it, and then you see them 6 months later and they tell us that they watched their grandchildren graduate or their children getting married, that to us is what makes us keep going.
The constant is the fact that physicians want to help patients.
It slowly sinks in that
It's not just kind of a job or assignment. It begins to take on our duties, obligations.
You know, this hospital is a ministry.
One constant that will always remain is the human touch. We are blessed to have employees, physicians, volunteers, board members, and countless others who come here each and every day thinking, how do they make patients' lives better? We know new buildings will come up, new technologies will arise. I have no doubt that as long as we continue focused on our eye care values and remain that hospital with a soul, the next 100 years will be even better than the first.